गाइए गणपति जगवंदन, गाइए गणपति जगवंदन, गाइए गणपति जगवंदन। शंकर सुवन भवानी नंदन, गाइए गणपति जगवंदन। शंकर सुवन भवानी नंदन, गाइए गणपति। सिद्धि सदन गजवदन विनायक, सिद्धि सदन गजवदन विनायक। कृपा सिंधु सुंदर सबदायक, कृपा सिंधु सुंदर सबदायक। गाइए गणपति जगवंदन, शंकर सुवन भवानी नंदन, गाइए गणपति। मोदक प्रिय मुद मंगलदाता, मोदक प्रिय मुद मंगलदाता, मोदक प्रिय मुद मंगलदाता। विद्यावारिधि बुद्धि विदाता, मोदक प्रिय मुद मंगलदाता। विद्यावारिधि बुद्धि विदाता, मांगत तुलसीदास कर जोड़ी। मांगत तुलसीदास कर जोड़ी, मांगत तुलसीदास कर जोड़ी। बसहि राम सिया मानस मोहे, बसहि राम सिया मानस मोहे। बसहि राम सिया, सिया राम राम सिया, बसहि राम सिया मानस मोहे। गाइए गणपति जगवंदन, शंकर सुवन भवानी नंदन, गाइए गणपति।
Namaskar and thank you very much, Vani Ramurthy. She is a disciple of the Ranjani and Gayatri. I welcome everybody this afternoon. Swagatam, Namaskar, to Namaste 2020, a global Utsava of Indian soft power. We have been supported by the ICCR and also the S. Vyasa University. We have come to our last weekend of celebration, and it has been a wonderful journey, a lot of learning, of course, a lot of hard work, but the learning and the people that have come and spoken at the sessions, it has just been a beautiful journey for us. This session is about the transdisciplinary nature of Indian knowledge systems, and we have several experts right here on the panel now. But I would like to say two words about this transdisciplinary nature of our knowledge systems. I find that maths was something that was very inbuilt into our life, but now because we are slowly moving away from our roots, children seem to be complaining about maths in school now. I remember maybe it was about 20 years ago when I went to the bazaar to buy banana leaves. And I asked for an odd combination. There was a very small child, maybe he was all of 7 years old. And I said, I want 3.5 or something like that, some odd number. And within a second, he told me what it would cost. It took me a little longer to, mentally calculate. And I said, do people often buy this much? He said, no. He said, why you are suddenly like this? I said, you're sure that's the right price? He said, of course it's the right price. And, pat on, he calculated in his mind and he gave it. But today you go to the store and you ask, and immediately out comes either their cell phone or their calculator or something like that. And I never fail to ask them. And, they always look and say, okay, you come from some old age. I asked them, I said, can't you just calculate? This is quite simple, with your mind. So there is something that has changed in our lifestyle because our traditional lifestyle did lend a lot of math. Of course, science and chemistry and everything else, but I'll have you all talk about that. And we have our special guest today with us, Dr. Oscar Pujol, and welcome to you, sir. I would like to say a few words about him. Mr. Oscar Pujol studied Sanskrit at the Banaras Hindu University, where he took his PhD with the edition of the Samartha Pada of the Tantra Pradipika, a manuscript on Sanskrit grammar from 12th century Bengal. He has published several books and translations from the Sanskrit classics, among them The Wisdom of the Forest, translations from the Upanishads, Hymn to the Earth, The Love Thief of Bilhana, Savitri, Kavya Purushopatti of Rajasekhara, the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, Rasa, Aesthetic Pleasure in Indian Aesthetics, From the Ganges to the Mediterranean, and 2 monographs, one on Shankara and another on Patanjali. He has into his account more than 100 published articles and reviews. He has also published the Sanskrit Catalan Dictionary in 2005 and the Sanskrit Spanish Dictionary in 2019 of 64,000 words. That for the first time includes the etymologies of contemporary philology and those of the Indian grammarians. In 2002, he helped in establishing Casa Asia in Barcelona as Director of Educational Programs, introducing the teaching of Asian languages, including Sanskrit, promoting the creation of Asian degrees at Spanish universities, and fostering Indo-Spanish relations. He founded in 2007 the Institute Cervantes of New Delhi. He has also directed the Institute Cervantes of Porto, Alegre, Rio de Janeiro, and Fez. Presently, he is the director of the Instituto Cervantes of New Delhi. Namaskar, sir. We would like your opening remarks. After that, Aparna will introduce the rest of this august panel, and then we'll take it forward. Namaskar. Sir, please unmute yourself.
Thanks, Vijaya Lakshmiji, for this presentation. I'm very happy to be here, to be a special guest in this panel on the transdisciplinary nature of science, art, maths in the Indian knowledge system. I am very pleased, especially because the panelists are really a very distinguished scholars, all of them. I want to my namaskar to Dr. Papu Venugopal Rao. It's a pleasure to meet you again, sir. And I'm sure that you have a lot of things to say today. And if you allow me, Mr. Rao, I would like very much to know, and this is very a transdisciplinary question, why many books on musicology, Sanskrit musicology, like Sangeeta Ratnakar, begin with a description of the fetus. It's a very amazing thing, and I'm sure you have one answer for that. I am also very happy to see here Mr. Gerard Huet from France. It's a long time I hear about him, long time I wanted to meet you, Mr. Huet. We are doing an e-meeting here on the coldness of the screen. I hope we can meet one day, physically. I am right now staying in Delhi. And I will say that Mr. Huet is a brother in dictionary making. because he has made a Sanskrit-French dictionary, which is available on the internet. And I really admire his work also in computational linguistics. And it's a real pleasure to be here with you, Mr. Wet. Also, I'm very impressed by the CV of Dr. Shankar Rajaraman, psychiatrist by training and a Sanskrit poet by passion. That's really a very interesting thing. And it's very rare, and I'm looking forward to listening to him, because I think applying emotions in Sanskrit poetics to the psychiatric practice is a very interesting thing to do. And finally, my namaskar to a musician like Vidwan Palgad Ramprasad. I think you are very fortunate, sir, because you have the blessings of a living tradition. You come from a family of musicians and learning music from your own father. I think in these modern times, that's a kind of honor that not everybody has. And it's I think, really important. Well, I won't talk too long, but one thing I would like to comment, because we say the Indian knowledge system. This is a nice sentence in English. I think in Sanskrit or in Hindi, we'll say Bharatiya Gyan Pranali. And I am really struck up by this sentence, Indian knowledge system. What means Indian knowledge system? I think you can also dwell on that, because basically what we are saying when we say Indian knowledge system in this context, I think we are talking about the Sanskrit Shastra. But not only the Sanskrit Shastra. I think we will be, unjust if while thinking about Indian knowledge system, we thought only about Sanskrit. Because we should think about Sanskrit, his descendant language, like Pali, like the Prakrits, like also modern Indo-Aryan languages like Awadhi, Brajbhasha, Bengali, etc., etc. And also we have to include into this Indian knowledge system all the words in Dravidian languages, of course, like Telugu, Kannada, Tamil, Malayalam. What I mean to say, and I think that's very important, that sometimes we can look at the Indian languages as a single continuum. This is special so for Indo-Aryan languages. I mean, from Sanskrit, from Pali, Prakrits, and into modern vernaculars. But also Dravidian languages, even if the linguistic family is different, they are so much interlinked with Sanskrit and with the knowledge system of India that it's very important to include into this Indian knowledge system all the native language of India, especially those who have such a rich Shastraic literature, be it in Sanskrit or in other Indian languages. I think that the Indian knowledge system, and I have said this many times, and for me it's a key problem to the situation of Sanskrit and Indian knowledge today. I always say that Indian knowledge system is a pioneering system in the world of knowledge, because since many centuries ago already it's been employing several analytical devices that only in the 20th century were discovered in the West, but were consciously employed by the Indian savants many centuries ago. I have mentioned them many times, but I will repeat them again here because I think they're interesting. And I'm sure that many more can be added to this list of analytical devices which are so modern and so important for human sciences and sciences in general, but are completely unknown in the West the way Sanskrit discovered them. To number just a few, the zero suffix, the distinction between language and meta-language, the usage of context-sensitive rules, the fact that grammar was conceived almost as a programming language able to produce an infinite number of well-formed expressions. I often say that we have still not understood in modern philosophy, all the potentialities of Indian ontology and logic, and we have not tapped all the technical resources that the hermeneutics of Mimamsa can offer us. It's very interesting to entertain analysis of texts, of modern texts according to Mimamsa categories. Even the study of advertising messages in publicity could be done by applying the concepts of Shabdi Bhavana and Arti Bhavana in Mimamsa. In other areas of Sanskrit, of course, we are witnessing the increasing interest of the modern world in such things as Sanskrit aesthetics. exemplifying the theories of Rasa, I think, which has a lot of potential also, and Dwani, and which help us to understand the nature of aesthetic delight. Again, here see concepts such as aesthetic distance, universalization, empathy, Tanmaya Bhava, were used already, by Sanskrit scholars, but only came to be discovered in the West in the field of aesthetics in the 20th centuries. What I mean to say, and that's very important to me, which the biggest problem I feel is that still now we are not able to integrate Sanskrit, and I say vernacular knowledge and Dravidian knowledge, into the common problems of human science and science in general. It's a very difficult thing to do, we know that linguistics was invented by the Indians, and we know the wonders of Sanskrit grammar and his computational linguistic properties also, but this does not come into the mainstream discourse of human sciences, not only in the West, but at large, And I think there are still many things to be discovered in Sanskrit texts that could be useful today, but the problem is that to retrieve them is not an easy task. And this stems, no doubt, from the complexities and difficulties which arise in retrieving information contained in the Sanskrit commentaries and in commentaries in Kannada or in Avadi, and applying it to the corresponding problems as raised by modern human science. It's not a case of simply not wanting to see something, but rather that a lot of effort has to be applied to make this vision possible. The problem we have here is that on one hand, people having a sound knowledge of Sanskrit commentaries too often show little interest in the related Western disciplines. On the other hand, people having a good understanding of today's most relevant issues have a very fragmented knowledge of the Sanskrit and the Indic sources in general. So the bridge needs to be built between the two worlds. And Indology and Indian studies in general should apply its efforts to the common task of bridging the gap between Eastern and Western human sciences. I think that's very important for us today, to interact more and to make all this Sanskrit knowledge and Indic knowledge in general, as I said, related to other language, available for specialists, not only in the West, but all over the world, and to be able to translate that into modern categories so as to make this knowledge relevant. Well, thanks very much. That's all I wanted to say. I think it's very important to keep this in mind, and I'm really looking forward to this session. Namaskar, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pujol, for a lovely introduction to this session. Today morning, we had a related session, which was on yoga, and the speaker spoke about yoga and neuroscience. And we had a session last week on mantras and neuroplasticity. So the application and research, scientific research into Sanskrit as well as into yoga and Ayurveda is already happening in the world. And the morning speaker spoke about the impact, and it's possible to assess now the impact of yoga on the brain. And I think if we were to use the tools that we mentioned, like MRI scans and EEGs, and test it on our illustrious panel today, we would probably have the intellect of all our rishis put together in these among our panelists. We have Dr. Pappu Venugopal Rao. He's an Indic scholar, and he will be speaking on rasa and the connection between Indian art forms. He will probably traverse the world of both music and dance, of which he's an expert. I'm just going through the topics because Pujolji has kindly given us a brief introduction to our speakers. We have Dr. Gerard Hewitt. He's a Sanskrit computational linguist from France, and he will be speaking on Sanskrit linguistics and informatics. We have Dr. Shankar Rajaram, a Sanskrit poet. He will be speaking on Chitrakavya, mathematics, and meter. Dr. Palghat Ramprasad, he is a doctor and doctorate in economics, but he's also a Carnatic musician, and he will be speaking in Laya, in music, and mathematics. Over to you, Dr. Pappu Venugopal.
Thank you very much, Aparna Sridhar. Thank you, Oscar, Professor Oscar Pujol, an eminent Sanskritist who gave a wonderful opening remarks on, the Indian knowledge system. And I offer my pranams to my co-panelists. We have a very distinguished panelist today. We have Mr. Gerard Hewitt, a Sanskrit computational linguist, Dr. Shankar Rajaraman, a rare combination of a psychiatrist and a Sanskrit poet, and Dr. Palgat Ramprasad, an economist by education and a mridangist, a vidwan by passion. Now, today's topic is transdisciplinary nature of science, arts, and mathematics. I recollect a story from my childhood. A king wanted to build a temple. So before that, he asked his minister, is there anybody who can talk to me about Shilpa Shastra? So a guru came to him and said, Maharaja, what do you want to know? He said, I want to know Shilpa Shastra. Then he told him, sorry, I cannot teach you Shilpa Shastra directly. You have to learn Agama Shastra. Then he said, okay, bring a Agama Shastra expert. So an expert came and he said, we should basically know some literature to understand Agama Shastra. Then the person who came to teach him literature asked him, why are you asking all these things? What do you want exactly? He said, I want to know about Shilpa Shastra. He said, you should have basic knowledge of dance, and to have basic knowledge of dance, you should have basic knowledge of music. So these are all connected to one another. No branch of knowledge is an island. So each one of us today, we talk about the transdisciplinary nature of the Indian knowledge system. This afternoon, each one of us will take 10 minutes, and we'll take all questions together after the presentations. Now let me deal with rasa in Indian art. What is rasa? It is translated severally into English as emotion or sentiment. But the Sanskrit term rasa may not have a very apt English word. Rasa first found in Rig Veda to mean water, milk, essence, and an essence of some weeds called soma rasa. And then the Atharva Veda gained another meaning called taste. And subsequently, all Upanishads talked about essence as rasa. And the Taittiriya Upanishad, it is used to mean the ultimate reality, raso vai saha. Now, writers on aesthetics, poetics, started using this word rasa as a bliss that one experiences on seeing a drama or reading a book. Rasa is a very important subject for students of aesthetics and artists. When we experience rasa, we forget our surroundings and temporarily avoid all other thoughts and emotions. That is why Aristotle calls it catharsis, but does not define what is catharsis. Coleridge calls it conscious disbelief because we know the actor is not the character, yet we are immersed in the rasa. Aristotle's guru, Plato, mentions in his book Republic that the goal of arts is to provoke the feelings inherent in human beings. Their outlook was somehow focused on tragedy. But in Indian literature, it is said poetic works may begin with auspicious note, continue with auspicious note, and end in auspicious note. Mangaladini, Mangala Madhyani, Mangalantani. But in an aesthetic, it is an aesthetic experience, a bliss that is a sahrudaya, a connoisseur, experience on reading a book, seeing a drama or film, or seeing a sculpture, or even a rainbow or a peacock dance, or just by looking at the formation of clouds or movement of waves. I use the word sahrudaya, which means it may be translated as connoisseur. Do all people experience rasa is the question. No. Rasa also used to mean taste in Upanishads. Just as we say tastes differ, rasa experience also differs. Seeing a very sorrowful scene, for example, from Ramayana, where Sita may be getting ready to self-immolate herself, people in the audience react differently. Some people may weep uncontrollably. Some people may have traces of tears in their eyes. Some people may just watch it seriously. The intensity of experience differs from person to person. Bharta's Natyashastra, a treatise on dramaturgy authored around 2nd century BC to 2nd century AD anywhere, is the most ancient text available, which deals with rasa. But it's clear from his own, in chapter 6 and 7, he deals with rasa and bhava. You find a lot of quotations from his ancestral slokas, Anuvamshya slokas. He talks about previous preceptors and their slokas. Bharata's Natyashastra is the earliest treatise available dealing with rasa. All later works on poetics, literature, literary criticism, aesthetics, dance, or drama invariably depended on Natyashastra. And some have added their own version, some expanded the rasa theory, and some differed with him, some offered new explanation. There has been a process of evolution of rasa theory in Indian arts. It began with the drama first, then it has gone to, in the 10th, 11th centuries, it has gone to literature, and later it has again come to drama, and finally it has come as an assimilation of all forms of art. Let's not go into the technical jargon of the definition of the terms and the process how rasa is created. It is better to rather enjoy the dish than the process of cooking. So there are two very important quotations of Bharata. Bharata says at one place, nahi rasadhrute kinchid artha pravartati, which means there is nothing which is devoid of rasa. And another quote is a very, very simple and direct, explicit, briefest possible definition of rasa, rasyate iti rasaha. You know, here the word rasa is once noun, once verb. Rasyate iti rasaha, that which is cherished is rasa. A sahrudaya, or a connoisseur, defined by Abhinav Gupta of 10th century, a Kashmiri Shaivite scholar, who wrote a commentary for both the Dhvanyaloka of Anandavardhana and the Natyashastra. He says, the connoisseur is like a mirror whose heart the emotions exhibited in the drama reflect. In the sense, you know, in Urdu they say, अगर चेहरा ठीक नहीं है तो आईना को क्लीन मत करो, चेहरा पहले ठीक करो. So that is why, you know, you have to clean your heart, purify your heart before you understand and reflect the yesham kavyanushīlanavashat vishadibhute manomukare varnaniya tanmayi bhavana yogyata te hridaya samvadabhajah sahrudaya. Sahrudayas are like mirrors. A sahrudaya grasps the feelings, emotions of the poet and have the same wavelength with the poet and thereby enjoys the bliss of aesthetic experience. When we see life in sculpture, we experience this bliss. It is not limited to literary works alone. The ancient Sanskritics have very nicely scientifically divided everything into drishya and shravya. The what you can audio visual and what we can read or hear. Now that means it removes all constraints of where and when one experiences rasa. We can experience rasa in A to Z, literally anthropology to zoology. As Keats says, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. What would have been, for example, the feeling of Archimedes when he found the weight loss of himself in water is equal to the weight of the volume of water displaced by his body? That eureka is an experience of bliss. And that is rasanubhuti, or experience of rasa. We are often bowled over by the inherent beauty in nature as well as by the creativity of an artist. It is web, may it be a spider, building its web, or a Bollywood actor or a Kuchipudi dance or a folk singer. Beauty has many incarnations, and human beings who can feel it, only those human beings who can feel it experience it. Sorry, it is not meant for all. Most mechanic minds may not find the bliss in the beautiful areas, but they too have their own choices where they too experience their rasa. Just as it is said in a lot of Indian language, there is a proverb that there is no one who is not wet in a rain. There is nobody who does not experience rasa. Everybody experiences rasa. It is a universal bliss and a joy that even stones can offer you. The best component of rasa is, whereas in the mundane life, in real life, sorrow is sorrow, happiness is happiness. But in rasa experience, even sorrow is bliss. That is the beauty of experiencing rasa. One last word, rasa is universal, experienced in any field by the connoisseurs, beyond the boundaries of academics, geographical regions, religion, caste, or agenda. You see, you can see a Chinese movie that you don't understand Chinese, even if you don't have subtitles. If you follow what it is happening, you can weep or smile based on the situation. So rasa is interdisciplinary. Rasa is there is nahi rasadhrite kinchid ardha pravartate. There is nothing which is devoid of rasa. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy that we have wonderful panelists who will talk about various things now. And then I request now Mr. Gerard Fiat, a Sanskrit computational linguist, to make his presentation. Professor Gerard.
Well, namaste everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Actually, I expected to be talking after the Chitra Kavya and make some remarks about this art style, but I can start. Well, first of all, let me tell that this Utsava to which we are participating is celebrating the diversity of Indian culture. And so this diversity is projected on the Western categories of science and knowledge. And this way we can extract out of Indian culture some feats that are recognizable in these Western categories. So Chitra Kavya is typical of this, in that one recognizes, so Chitra Kavya, Dr. Rajaraman is going to talk about it, but some of it is linked to mathematical reasoning. Let me maybe share the screen with you. Can you see this? Can you see my screen?
No, sir.
No. Let me see.
You have to share your screen. Yeah, now we are going.
Now you're seeing my screen?
Yes, sir, we can see it.
All right. So you see on the left, this is a piece of Chitra Kavya. So it's a poem that is written. You see here you have one syllable in Devanagari on every square of the chessboard. See? Se, na, li, etc. And if you read this as a poem, line after line, then you will get some bizarre Sanskrit poem. But you can also read it another way. You can read it according to the moves of a horse, of a knight on the chessboard. See, you can start here from this C and then jump as a knight to this square, and here you find the Na, the same as here. And now you can keep going. And so there are two readings of this poem. And one is in the normal way, left to right, top to bottom. But the other one is very bizarre. It's according to the moves of the knight. And there is a whole tradition of this. See here, actually this painting is somewhere in the Tata Institute of Mumbai in the Department of Mathematics. See, because this poem can be considered as a proof that in mathematical terms, there is a Hamiltonian path in the chessboard according to the moves of the knight. That means you can use the moves of the knight and cover all the squares of the chessboard once and only once. Okay, so there is a whole tradition in the West of this kind of result, which is combinatorial analysis, which was started by Euler in the 18th century. And Hamiltonian path is one of this notion. So here we can analyze this Sanskrit poetry along the lines of some mathematical reasoning. But somehow we are losing something here. See, we are losing this whole wholeness of poetry and this combinatorial feat. So it's kind of desiccated. See? So this is a typical example where we can take some piece of Indian culture, Indian aesthetics, and then deconstruct it, break it apart, and then find pieces in Western categories, in boxes of Western categories, and somehow so it's nice that we give credit to this ingenuity of all Sanskrit poets, but it's kind of hard to fit in a desiccated way. Where do you find a modern explanation of this? Donald Knuth is a well-known professor at Stanford University. So he's considered to be the foremost computer scientist. And he's been writing this book on the art of computer programming since the 70s. And here is a current chapter on Hamiltonian paths and cycles. And here in this document, we find allusion to this tradition right here. See? Remarkably, Knight Scores on half of a chessboard had been published even earlier by Kashmiri poets who were famous for their wordsmithing skills. So here is a solution of a Hamiltonian path by Rudrata, who was a Kashmirian poet of the 9th century. And this was a whole tradition. The Ratnakara made another one, which is still more striking, because here, if you take this half chessboard and you take its mirror image vertically, then you can connect two of them and then get a Hamiltonian circuit, which is rather remarkable. So here Knuth gives the Rudrata poem. Here Rudrata was a theoretician of poetry. So he wrote this book, Kavya Alankara, which is, you know, the art of poetry. And so that's one of his examples of art of poetry, this two-dimensional poetry. And now, so all this can be, you know, recycled in mathematics and computer science algorithms about graph theory. But somewhere we are losing the wholeness of this tradition. So the same goes for linguistics. So how are we going to fit Indian linguistics into Western linguistics? The Indian linguistics, Vyakarana. So this is this tradition started very long time ago, more than 25 centuries ago, by scholars who were trying to preserve the Vedas, and then a grammatical tradition arose, and which culminated with Panini. Panini, the 5th century before the Common Era. So it's hard to fit in linguistics because linguistics is much later. Western linguistics started with de Saussure in the 19th century. And so let me first talk about this importance of the grammatical tradition in the cultural history of India, at least of North India. Let me give an example. Yeah, this is the one I want to show. So, so this is the story goes as follows. It's a Pandit. It's a Pandit poet. He is going to a sabha, so a competition of poetry given by the King Bhoja. So he's very, very infatuated of his art, and he's being transported on a palaka, and he sees the palaka bearer next to him, and it's very cold, and the man is almost naked. So he asks him, you know, is the cold bothering you? So is the cold bothering you? It's api shitam bhadati. But he makes a mistake. He says api shitam bhadati. And this is incorrect. See, here we have the correct form, bhadate. Bhadate, yes. Bhadate is the Atmanepade, a form of root bad. See, if you go in the dictionary to look at root bad, it's used only in the Atmanepade form, bhadate. It means to bother, but it's not. It's not that cold is bothering you, it's that you're feeling cold. So that's why you need this reflected voice, the Atmanepade. So here is this sentence is the answer of the palanquin bearer to the pandit. Lost my, here it is. He is answering, Natata bhadate sitam, yata bhadate bhadati bhadate. It is, it's not so much the cold that's bothering me, it's the form bhadati that's bothering me. See, so, so this is a joke, of course. The palanquin bearer knows grammar better than the pandit. Okay, so the joke goes that the pandit, the poet, realizes that his palanquin bearer is none other than Kalidas, and so he's going to lose the sadhas. So he gives up at this point. So this kind of anecdote. I mean, there are many such anecdotes about grammarians in Sanskrit poetry. Another one I want to show is this one. Samprapte saniyite kare nahi nahi rakshati dukrinkarane. So what does that mean? It means at the time of your last breathing, it is not dukrinkarane that is going to save you. So it's a joke about grammarians who are so much into their art that they are, you know, arguing about arcane things like this dukrinkarane. So what is this dukrinkarane that comes here? You know, it's like abracadabra. So actually, this is the entry point in the Dhatupata, in the database of verbal roots, of verb kar, to do. The kar is here. So here, this is some kind of a formal compression of a sign that designates completely unambiguously the root kar. And it has two parts. One part is this dukring. So there is some, you know, phonetic, genuine phonetic material here, this kar. This is the main phonemes of the root. Then this do is just a marker that will allow some operation in some part of the grammar. Similarly, this ñ here is an anubandha. It's a marker that tells that this root can be used in the Atmanepada. And the
Professor Gerard,
yes.
Can you wind up within a minute or two, because we have 10 minutes slot for each one of us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm here pointing out that this cryptic notation is actually the representation of a sign. That is the mixture of the syntactic material, syntactic and phonetic material that you need to know in order to know how to use the forms of the root kar to do, but it also gives its meaning. So karane, this is locative. This is in the meaning of to do. So this is kind of a seed in the Paninian system. The Paninian system is progressively being understood as a sign manipulation formalism, which is extremely formalized. So it has been compared rightly to a computer program. Actually, I say this is some kind of description of an abstract machine. So Panini, it's well known that Panini is created as some ancestor of linguistics. But what is less well known is that it's a completely constructive view of grammar that fits very well into notions of computer science. So this looks very anachronistic, of course, to attribute the creation of computer science concepts 25 centuries ago to Panini, but this is part of the difficulty, see, of giving the right recognition to the intellectual feat of giants such as Panini. So that's the essence of what I wanted to say about Panini.
Thank you very much, Professor Gerard. You spoke on Sanskrit linguistics and informatics. Nahi tada bhadate shitam yada bhadati bhadate is such a wonderful example. Much more apt is samprapte sanhite kale nahi rakshate dukhurum karani. Thank you very much for this wonderful session. We will move on to Dr. Shankar Rajaraman. He talks about Chitrakavya, mathematics, and meter. And probably he will talk about meter and matter, how they coordinate with each other.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot, Venugopal sir. Namaskaram to Vijayalakshmi ma'am, Aparna ji, Mr. Professor Pujol, Professor Hewitt, and Ram Prasad ji. I would request Aparna ji to share the screen with the audience.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I have named my presentation alliteratively as Math, Meter, and Marvel Poetry. Marvel Poetry is what goes by the name of Chitrakavya. You could also translate it as Wonder Poetry or Constraint Poetry, poetry that is composed amidst several constraints. The talk shall not be specifically on Marvel Poetry, Chitrakavya, because it's a huge universe by itself and has several sub-varieties. I shall specifically talk about the relationship between Math, Meter, and Marvel Poetry here. At the onset, I need to confess that I am not a mathematician by training. I am a psychiatrist. I'm a doctor basically. So what I present here is basically based on what little maths I have learned as a science student till my second PUC. So the plan of the presentation shall be like this. I shall discuss 2 Sanskrit verses. Verse 1 was composed by me for this specific occasion, and verse 2 is a verse composed by Vedanta Deshika from the 13th century AD, a verse which Professor Gerard Hewitt was also alluding to. I think no discussion on math and Chitrakavya will be complete without alluding to this verse. So that shall not form a greater part of my presentation. I shall devote my presentation basically to the first verse. Through first verse, I shall discuss how marvel or constraint poetry, which goes by the name of Chitrakavya, can bring within its ambit maths and also without sacrificing complex metrical rules. And verse 2 shall provide one solution to a mathematical problem, the Knight's Tour problem, which Professor Hewitt was also referring to. So can you go to the next? Yeah, this is the poem that I composed for this particular occasion. The verse is as follows. Gopi Ghata Madhuratama Gunodadhe Sadugi Khagoduda Charitavali Bahula Rasa Dhama Niramho Dridaika Dhisakrata. There is also this English transliteration which I have given below. We could go to the next slide. Obviously, this is a meaningful verse. Poets don't write meaningless verses. And each of the words that are used in this verse are quite common Sanskrit words. A person who has some acquaintance with the Sanskrit language will be able to catch most of the words that are used in this poem. So there is no question of me cheating with respect to the meaning of the verse, because most of these words are known to are part of several Indian languages also other than Sanskrit. So the verse translates as follows. It's a verse in praise of Krishna. O ocean, Udadhe, of merits, guna, merits that are greatly pleasing, madhura, tama. Tama indicates a superlative degree. So merits that are highly pleasing, most pleasing to the gopis aplenty, gopi ghata. O, one of virtuous, sadhu, speech, gihi. O, one that is born, ududha, by a bird, khaga. O, one who is replete, bahula, with a series, avali, as you use in the word Deepavali, of heroic exploits, charita. O, the abode, it should have been dhama, sorry, it's typed there wrongly as dha. Abode, dhama of bliss, rasa. O, sinless, niramho. Amho means sin. Niramha means a person who is sinless. O, richly endowed, sukrita, with an unwavering, dridha, and unique, eka, wisdom. So this is a verse where I have used Sambodhana to address Sambodhana Vibhakti, basically to address Lord Krishna. And can we go to the next slide, please? So what does this verse do? The verse basically explicates the value of pi till 41 decimal points. How does it do so? Each letter in the verse stands for a number according to the Katapayadi Sutra. So if you remember this verse, it is as good as remembering 41 decimal points of pi. And each letter here, each syllable of this verse stands for a particular number according to the Katapayadi Sutra. And many among the audience might know what Katapayadi Sutra is, especially those who are acquainted with Indian music. But then for those who have not heard of this Katapayadi Sutra, let me go to the next next slide. Yeah. So this is a crude analogy, very crude analogy from English language. So say you give A a value of B, B is equal to A a value of 1, B a value of 2, till I, which is 9, and J, you make it as 0. Then you give a value of 1 to K, 2 to L, 9 to S, and then 0 to T. Then for the remaining alphabets, you start with U, for which you give a value of 1, and till Z, for which you give a value of 6. Now, as an example, I have just taken 5 decimal points. So how could you represent alphabetically 3.14159 as? It could be represented alphabetically in several ways. 2 ways would be these meaningless strings of alphabets, C, A, D, A, E, I, and M, K, N, K, O, S, etc. Now, what if such a meaningless alphabetical representation actually made sense? Or much more difficult would be if it turned out to be a poem. So that is what I have attempted here. This is not the first attempt. There is a verse available which has used the Katapayadi Sutra to denote pi till 30 decimal points. Anushtup verse, 31 decimal points. But then I found that the verse is not very easily understandable without a commentary, because the words that are used there are not very commonly used in Sanskrit. So this verse is slightly a better version, because most of the words that are used in this verse are easily understandable, and therefore the verse itself becomes easy to memorize. Now coming to the next slide. So this is the Katapayadi Sutra. So as the sutra itself says, ka, ta, pa, ya. So kadinava. So from ka till cha, you give these alphabets. You represent them by 1, 2, 3 till 9. Kadi nava, starting from ka, 9 consonants. Tadi nava, starting from ta, 9 consonants. You number them as 1 till 9. Padi pancha, start from pa, and 5 alphabets that follow, or 5 syllables that follow, consonants that follow. You name them from 1 to 5. Yadi ashta. So ashta, that is 8 consonants starting from ya. You denote them by 1 till 8. And 2 anunasikas you denote by 0, as well as swaras, all the swaras, the vowels, you denote by 0. So this is the Katapayadi Sutra. But then, as you know, even composing a verse that spells out pi value till 41 decimal points is not easy. but the complexity of the verse that does not end there, because there are also metrical rules to be followed. So let us go back to our school days Sanskrit, where we learnt about metrics, chandas. So here I'll not deal with the entire Chanda Shastra, but only a few basics here. To make you understand the metrical complexities of the verse that I have composed. So all short vowels, a, e, u, ru, and r, take 1 unit of time. So you give them a score of 1. All consonants combined with short vowels, k, for example, k, ki, ku, kr, and kr, also take 1 unit of time to pronounce, and therefore you give them a score of 1. All long vowels, a, e, u, ru, a, I, o, au, and aha, take 2 units of time to utter. Therefore, you give them a score of 2. And similarly, all consonants that are combined with these long vowels also take 2 units of time, and therefore you give them also a score of 2. So, and also there is another rule: letter at the end of 2 lines and 4 lines. So each Sanskrit verse has 4 padas or 4 lines. The letter that occurs at the end of 2 lines or 4 lines is always given a count of 2, even though it might be a short vowel or a short consonant basically. So coming to the next slide, this particular verse which I composed is composed in the Giti meter. So there are certain rules for this Giti meter. So leave aside the pi value that I have represented. The meter itself has certain rules of its own which also have to be followed. So simultaneously, I am not just bringing the value of pi through the verse, but I am also following certain complex metrical rules. The rules here are, for the Giti meter, the line 1 should have a total matra count, total syllable count of 12. So the previous slide, as I discussed, each short vowel is given a count of 1 and a long vowel is given a count of 2. Short syllables are given a count of 1, long syllables are given a count of 2. So line 1, the count should add up to 12. Line 2, the count should add up to 18. And the same is true for line 3 and line 4. Line 3, 12 and line 4, 18. So now let us count them. So go, because it is a long vowel, you give it a count of 2. P, again it's a consonant that is combined with a long vowel, you give it a count of 2. G, because it's combined with a, which is a short vowel, you give it a count of 1. Similarly, ta has 2, ma is 1, dhu is 1, ra is 1, ta is 1, and ma is 1. Now you count these, count the matras, then you get a total matra count of 12. And similarly, for the second line, Gunoda dehe sadhugi khagoduda, if you count the short and the long syllables, then the count will add up to 18. So as you see, I am not just following, I'm not just composing a verse that can spell out the value of pi, but I am also simultaneously following these complicated metrical rules. So in the verse, what I have basically done is, I have converted a meaningless string of numbers. I have translated them into meaningful words. So if you remember this particular verse, and if you are conversant with the Katapayadi Sutra, just go through the Katapayadi Sutra 3-4 times. If somebody asks you what is the value of pi, and you remember the verse, you can immediately roll out the value of pi offhand. So this is about the first verse. Coming to the second verse, which a great deal has been spoken by Professor Huart also. I'll just add few notes here. So this is specifically called as Turaga Pada Patha. Turaga is a horse, Turaga Pada is horse move, and Patha is a reading that is based on Turaga Pada, the move of the horse or the knight's move in the chess, which goes by the name of Knight's Tour problem, solved by Euler. But several centuries before him, Rudrata and Vedanta Deshika, Bhoja also, and Ratnakara, etc. have attempted verses using Turagapada Patha. The only difference is, for example, in Rudrata, when you read a verse, so let me give a background to verses in Sanskrit. Each verse has 4 lines, and there are specific number of syllables in each line. The commonest of such verses is what goes by the name of shloka or anushtup. The shloka has 32 syllables, 4 lines, and each line has 8 syllables, so 8 4s are 32. So what you do is you construct, let us go to the next slide, and I'll come back again to the previous slide. So what you construct is a matrix of 8 into 4, and you fill up the verse, each letter of each syllable of the verse in the houses of this matrix. So the first letter, if it is Thi, so you the first house has Thi. The second letter of the verse is Ra, so the second house has Ra, like this. So can you go to the previous slide again? Yeah. So so what is the difference between Rudrata's verse and say the verse of Vedanta Deshika or Ratnakara is that in Rudrata's verse, what happens is when you read the verse, when you fill up these houses and start with the first house and then read in the pattern of a horse moving on a chest, you get the second verse. In Rudrata's case, the second verse is also the same verse. So you get the same verse from the given verse by reading in the manner that a horse travels. But with respect to Vedanta Deshika or Bhojaraja or even Ratnakara, you get a different verse. So that is the difference. So let us go again to the next slide. So Vedanta Deshika's verse is Sthiragasam Sadaradhya Vihata Katata Mata Satpaduke Sarasama Rangaraja Padam Naya. So I will not go into the meaning of this verse. Obviously, the word is meaningful. It needs a commentary, however, to understand it. So you fill up these syllables in the 34 houses of the Anushtup. So of the 8 into 4 matrix, and starting from the first syllable, you read in the pattern of a knight's move on the chessboard. So you start with Sti, then you move to Ta, then you move to Sa, then you move to Ma, etc. You have to move in such a way that none of the houses is repeated and all the houses are covered. Then you get a second verse, which is Tita Samaya Rajapa Gatara Madake Gavi Duramhasam Sannatada Sadhyatapaka Rasara. So this is the second verse that you get from the first verse. So with this, actually, with these two examples, because I have just 10 minutes, I thought I will just give you a idea of what Chitrakavya is and how Chitrakavya brings within its ambit even metrical complexities, and how Chitrakavya can also, so though there are several prakaras, so several sub-varieties of Chitrakavya, few varieties can also bring maths within their ambit. So with this, I finish my talk. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Shankar Rajaraman. It's very, very beautifully explained. You talked about Geeti and then Anushtup. I will just say, because I am an Avadhani, I'll say an Anushtup on all of us. Askaro, Shankaro, Ramaha, Gerardo, Venu Sanyutaha, Mrudushakti Matam Yete, Mrudushakti soft power. Mrudushakti Matam Yete, Vidvajjana Pramodavit. That is the Anushtup shloka for all of us.
Thanks.
And then let us go to Palghat Ramprasad. We are eagerly looking forward to your talk, because a part of music has come in Katapayadi through Shankar Rajaram. Katapayadi is the one that which we follow in 72 Malakartas in deciding the names of the ragas. So it's so beautifully presented by Shankar Rajaraman. Now it is Palghat Ramprasad. We will talk about Laya and music, nature, and mathematics. Vidwan Palghat Ramprasad. We have 9 minutes, 59 seconds.
Absolutely. Namaskaram to all panelists. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to, present whatever little I have done along with these elitist panel. Let me straight away go share the screen, and let's go here. I just wanted to check if everybody is able to see the screen that I've shared. Yeah?
Yes.
Everyone? Okay, great.
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't able to open the original PowerPoint presentation that I prepared, so all I had was like about 10 minutes to gather some thoughts and get done with whatever I'm showing you now. So excuse me if there are any kinds of irregularities in what a normal PowerPoint is like. So basically, this is an app that was created keeping in mind the constraints that performing musicians have with respect to presenting songs in a concert. So the two things which usually are an issue, which are usually issues for performing artists, is keeping in mind what we sang in the previous concert, probably in the same auditorium, or probably the last year in the same venue, but for a similar occasion. And are we able to provide variety in the concept list that we present? So these two are typical constraints that musicians face. Now, let me just take a minute to get into the motivation of why this is even important. Now we are in an age where everything is questioned. The only thing which is not questioned is like, are we born to our own parents? So again, people start saying that, you know what, DNA has to be tested. And now that is again like 99.7% is only, it's positive. So 0.3% there is again an error. So everything is questioned. And of course, tradition is the most soft target. So everything is questioned on tradition. So just to give you a quick background, the current concert Padati that we follow is something which we inherited from the Ramanujengar school of thought. So until then, Rao sir is here, probably he might also correct me. Until then, it used to be like the concerts that span like about 5 or 5.5 hours used to have typically 2 or 3 pieces, of which one used to be a Ragam Tanam Pallavi. And typically the concert used to start prior to 6 p.m. So the Varnam will go for the first column and the artist will go for the Sandhya Vandanam and come back. And then they will start off and finish the second column and the third column probably. And then start off with an elaborate Ragam Tanam Pallavi and finish the concert. So Ramanujengar, in pursuit of appealing to the general audience and getting it to a lot of people, he emphasized the role of variety, because some people might like fast-paced songs, some people might like slow-paced, some people might like Ranjana songs, some people might like aggressive kinds of tones. So in order to bring in a lot of variety, so he thought of packing a concert, a 3.5, 4-hour concert with about 10 or 11 songs, which might bring in the variety with respect to tempo, with respect to ragam, with respect to the composers, with respect to the language that is being spoken, that is being sung. So this is the concert format which we currently follow, basically to exploit all these varieties. And now this app is something which we thought might help artists and students come up with this kind of variety. Now, I'm going to give you an extremely stylized version or a very simplistic form of how this app works by using what is called a Delaunay triangulation process. So this is basically an optimization tool. Let's forget the jargon. Basically, it says, are we able to optimize certain points with respect to distances? For example, if I have to buy 15 things from 12 shops, right? What is the simplest way in which I can get all the 16 things from these 13 or 12 shops by spending the least amount of time? That's the simplest version of an Delaunay optimization. Now, the picture that you see here, right? It's an extremely simplified form. So let's say in my concert list, I'm going to present songs from 3 ragams. So ragam 1, 2, and 3. And just to make it very simple, I have made all the ragams sampurnam so that we can understand things better. So ragam 1 is in green color, ragam 2 is in pink, and ragam 3 is in blue. Right. So if I sing 3 songs from ragam 1, 2, and 3, let's look at ragam 1, the right side of your panel, which has sa, re2, ga2, ma2, pa, da1, and ni2. Similarly for ragam 2 and ragam 3. If I were to present a song from ragam 1 and then right after that present a song in ragam 2, you see that except for one note, everything else is the same, right? So when you see that ragam 1 versus ragam 2, the difference is only one note out of the 7 notes that is presented, which is basically the ga, right? Now, if I were to present a song from ragam 2 and then right after that present a song in ragam 3, there are 3 notes which are different. And similarly, After Ragam 1, if I'm going to present Ragam 3, there are 4 notes which are different. So ideally, going by simplest logic and intuition, I would want to present Ragam song from Ragam 1 and then move to Ragam 3 so that there are 4 notes which are different and therefore I'm able to provide more variety. So this is the most simplest form of a variety exploitation that I'm looking in terms of the differences in notes. Again, three things to keep in mind. Of course, R1, R2, R3 and the gap of G1, GA1, GA2, GA3 are not depicted the way in which they are supposed to, because I mean there could also be audience who might not be very familiar with what the difference in R2 and G1 are. So I have just made it extremely simple. I mean, I'm even talking about this because there was a mention of Kadapayati. So that's the reason I'm even mentioning this. Otherwise, it's straightforward to understand. Obviously, this is again an example based on Sampurna Ragam. There are several Ragams. In fact, Sampurna Ragams are like about 2 or at the most 3 that we present in a concert. I'm just talking about a 3.5 hour concert. So basically, this is the idea. Now, if I take a route of Sa, Re, Ga, Ma, Pa, Da, Ni, Sa, how am I able to optimize with respect to the differences in notes? So I might not want to sing a ragam which starts with Todi and then go to the Janyam of Todi. It doesn't make sense, right? So it is quite possible that artists who might otherwise be extremely busy with their so many different concert schedules, out of oversight, might tend to forget noting these things. That is one thing. The other thing is it might be helpful for students to understand how to come up with a program list exploiting the variety in the ragam. Now, this is what I explained earlier was just restricted to ragam. But it is also important that we bring in variety with respect to the tempo, talam, composer, and language if we have the cushion of, like, let's say a 2.5 or a 3 hour concert, so that it is appealing to several people. Some people might like really fast-paced songs, some people might like slow-paced. So basically, the output from this app will say something like this. The first one says song 1 in Saveri and song 2 in Todi. The output of the, after you create the list, when you say enter, it will say song 1 and song 2 are very close. So this won't give you an alternative. It won't say that, okay, therefore choose Suddha Saveri or something like that. It will only basically take the input from whatever you have created in the list and talk about whether they are close or whether they are not close. That is all it would say. And if I had missed Kanda Chappu in my list, it will also say missed Kanda Chappu. Or it will also say missed Muthuswami Dikshikar. Predominantly, it will take on the most popular of composers like the Trinities, then Papanasam Shivan, then Purandaradasa, Swati Tirunelveli. So this is all the basic stuff that you will see out of the output from using this app. As I said before, it is extremely important for students to understand how to come up with a concept list, because artists spend a lot of time coming up with concept list and also ensuring that there is no repetition in the concert. And these days, people are so particular, the audience is so particular about not repeating the same song or the same ragam for whatever reason they have in mind. But regardless, it is a helpful tool for that. As I said before, for experienced professionals, it is also helpful for us that we don't get into this oversight of having ragams next to each other. The one word of caution is the app does not distinguish the bhava aspect. For example, if two ragas, though might be very different, but produce the same kind of rasa or the bhava, the app might not be able to understand. Because as we said before, as Dr. Rao said before, everyone goes through the rasa, but how we internalize it is extremely personal, right? So I may think that I am singing the most Rakti of Natakurunji, but if I sing it in such a way that Dr. Rao says, what is this Natakurunji? I have never heard in all these years. I cannot help it. That's the Natakurunji that I know. So the app will not be able to distinguish that rasa bhavam between ragams, though they might be different. It will still say that it is different. And Devagandhari is totally different from Natakaranji, from what the notes say, might be the app says. But yeah, the kind of rasa that we produce are different. So that is also something which is a major limitation of this app. And this app also helps source the kanakas for, let's say, the percussionist. If they come up with a good solo or a good pattern, they can store it as a voice memo in this app. So just in case they want to come up, probably they are, they are accompanying for the same main artist for the same song, let's say, in a different concert. They may just go back and they may just see the pattern or the kanaka that the vocalist had sung in a previous concert. So they will be able to be prepared in a they'll be able to be prepared in a fashion that they may be able to accompany better in a concert. So this is just an oversight of how triangulation, which is basically trying to exploit the space differences across different points, which is typically used in econometrics. So I have used it, extensively in my econometrics paper. So this concept of even using it for a concert list came from a casual conversation with my appa, who said that you're doing so much of statistics and mathematics, why don't you do something which is useful for musicians? So I was like, okay, let me try. I don't know whether it's useful, but I can definitely try. So that is the aim at which this started. And so far this has good traction. And right now we are going to upgrade it to a paid version. So it has taken a temporary hiatus. Probably in another couple of months, we will start making it a paid version, and it will be downloadable both for iOS as well as Android platform. This is what I have for you today.
Thank you, Ram Prasad. Let me ask you one simple question.
Yeah.
Is it Mani Pravaham?
That's what I coined it as.
What do you mean by that? There should be some meaning.
Yeah, so the series basically initially it started off only with Ragam. So we started keeping on adding series after series like Talam, composers and all that. So I named it Pravaham as a series and sequence.
Yeah, because what we say, in what normally is in use is Mani Pravalam.
Right.
Because Mani is a gem and Pravalam is a coral. So like if you have 2-3 different languages, it is like a cluster of different kinds of precious stones. That is Mani Pravalam. Mani Pravalam is, is used for composers who have composed in 2 languages, 3 languages in one song and things like that. Mani Pravaham, your Pravaham has swept me away now.
Basically, it is for
Thank you for this app. Yeah, what do you aim to do through this? Do you find how is it useful for a student of Carnatic music? Is it useful only for practitioners or connoisseurs, rasikas?
Yeah. So, for example, if for artists, it's straightforward. As I said, when you come up with a list, either by oversight or without knowledge, if you have ragams right next to each other and you are not aware of that, this app is going to tell you right over your face that, you know what, these 2 ragams are extremely close. For connoisseurs, for example, if I, as a rasika, just feel that I think these 2 ragams are extremely close, all I can do is just dabble these 2 ragams in the app and try to see what the output says. And if the output says that, you know what, if I'm not aware that I have had Hindolam right next to Todi, and as a Rasika, I don't know the technical detail, but all I know is that, you know what, it sounds somewhat similar, but still there are some major differences. Yeah, you miss a Pa there, you miss a Rishabham there, right? And then you compare these 2, it is going to say what percentage is close. And then if you click on that, it will say that Pa is missing, the Rishabham is missing. And so these kinds of, for a layman who might not understand the technicalities, there is an opportunity for him or her to look into the details of what he or she thinks is the difference. So that is
it is meant for people who know music.
As I said before, I may not know music, but I just know that these are the names of the 2 ragas. But are they similar or are they different? Am I right in even thinking the way that I'm thinking? Probably the app might help them.
How will it help if you don't know the difference between Trishruti Gandharam or Trishruti Rishabham or anything?
Yeah, so the app doesn't say that how the Rishabhams are different. It doesn't say that this is the Sashruti Rishabham and this is Suddha Gandharam, therefore they are close. That it won't say. So it will basically say that the Ris are the same, the Gas are same, the Mas are same, or the Ris are different, Gas are different. So it will stop to that extent. It won't go beyond that. So only to that extent it helps. As I said, that's a limitation.
So your target audience are, who are your target audience?
So for artists, as I said before, it helps in storage and it helps oversight for experienced musicians. For students, it will help them analyze on how they are different. So for students who might have knowledge, they will know that, okay, the Gandharam and the Rishabham are pretty close and therefore I should not use that. For Rasikas, it doesn't really matter whether the Ga and Ri is different, the notes are different. It stops there. So in that regard, the thinking was basically to help everyone, but in different levels. That's all.
Well, that's very, very nice. Let me invite all the panelists onto the screen. Unmute yourself. I request Shankar Rajaraman, Professor Gerard here, and Oscar Pujol. All of you, please come onto the screen. Let us have the party. Yeah. Are there any questions from the panelists to one another? Then we'll go to questions from the audience, if there are any.
I have a question to
Dr. Oscar.
Yeah, Ram Prasad sir.
Yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Namaste, Ram Prasad sir. Wanted to know if there is a ready reckoner of bhavas and rasas with respect to ragas. Is there already a ready list of such a correspondence?
I'm not sure. Yeah, please.
No, that is not an answer. That's not a question for Ram Prasad. That is a question for me.
Thank you, sir.
Natya Shastra very explicitly says in where, it does not talk about ragas because in those days there was no raga at that time. It talks about where you should not use nishada, where you should use nishada more, where you should need the stress on daivatam or gandharam, depending on the kind of rasam. So there is an explicit, the 6 chapters that deal with rasa in Natya Shastra from 28, 29, no, even 20, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. Those chapters deal with some of these things. And there are also occasions where Bharata says, even Chandas, because I'm coming into your topic. Even Chandas, you cannot use, for example, a Panchachamaram for a Srungaram. You cannot use Jata, Kata, Sambrahma, Brahman, Limpa, there is something like a Panchachamaram to express Srungaram. There is no way you can do that. So the Chandas, the Rasam, the Bhavam, the Laya, and the Ragam are all, Ragam, which is the latter concept, are all connected. So it does not explicitly say Ragams and Rasam, but it will say the Rasa, the Bhava, and the notes that should be prohibited are used. It is said in the Natya Shastra. It is explicitly mentioned in Natya Shastra. Yes, sir. Dr. Oscar Pujol.
Unfortunately, I have to take leave, I have to go somewhere else. I just wanted to thank all of you for this incredible Utsav. It's been very refreshing. Dr. Venugopala, I really appreciate your extending beauty to sciences and all other fields of human expertise and knowledge. And I just want to close this remembering that Kumaraswamy, he used to speak about the beauty of a precise mathematical formula. And I think that beauty, as you said very well, it's everywhere. And to crack that beauty by analysis is not enough, because as you all know very well, we cannot in the end analyze rasa. It's an integral experience that it lasts as long as it is released. And with these words, thanks very much. I'm really grateful to all of you. Hoping to see you soon again. Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other panelists who want to say anything else? Professor Gerard?
Yes. Let me come back to this argument that it's hard to fit Indian culture notions into the Western classification. This Western classification, where does it come from? There is a very influential scientist in the 19th century, Auguste Comte. Auguste Comte was a mathematics teacher at École Polytechnique, which was very prestigious. And he had some kind of view of all sciences as being linearly ordered. So at the top you had mathematics, then you had physics, then chemistry, then biology, and then all the rest of the knowledge was in the last category, which he called sociology. So in sociology, you had everything about law and art and linguistics, all the humanities, but which were considered as some kind of thing that you can explain using all the upper layers, you know, starting from mathematics. And this had a very strong influence on the classification of university topics in the 19th century and up to now, to very recently in Western universities. So it's hard to measure Indian culture with this kind of linear scale. So many of the talks today, you know, try to take out mathematical pieces out of art forms that are to be considered as, you know, holistic in some sense, and that lose a lot from being cut into pieces. So typically for linguistics, for instance, Panini, how can one explain Panini's techniques nowadays in view of modern linguistics? See, linguistics was appeared in the Western scene rather late at the end of the 19th century with de Saussure. And de Saussure knew very well Sanskrit. He was first a Sanskrit teacher, and his PhD thesis was actually on the absolute genitive construction in Sanskrit. So that's how linguistics really appeared in the Western intellectual sphere, is through the understanding or the partial understanding of the Indian grammarians. So now if you want to explain Panini's grammar to a modern linguist, then you can, you know, kind of take it apart and say, oh, all the vriti, you know, kridanta, taditanta, and so on. All this is functional morphology. Okay. And now you will take another part, you will take the Karaka system. And you say, oh, Karaka analysis, this is the dependency grammars of this kind, of this other kind, and so on. So now you have broken the system, which is really holistic. You know, all the rules are interdependent on each other. You have broken it into two very different things. And on the way, you have actually ignored the most interesting intellectual feat of Panini is to have been able to fit in 4,000 very terse sutras all you need to know about Sanskrit grammar. And these 4,000 sutras, they fit in one human memory with enough training, okay? And so this is due to many devices that now we understand as computer science structures, you know, for compacting and so on, for encodings. So you see the difficulty of taking an item of Indian culture and breaking it into parts and now putting it into Western boxes.
Professor Gerard, I feel the difficulty is because of the changes in the methodology, the pedagogy, and the kind of way, the way we teach and learn today. In our childhood, I'm 73 now. In our childhood, when we learned anything, whatever it taught is by hearted by the next morning. And you will be surprised if I tell you, I remember about 100,000 verses. The reason is the way that the teaching has happened, the 4,000 aphorisms of Panini or anything like that. This cover to that cover, a grammarian will know it by heart. So the computer, just like what Vijayalakshmi said in the very beginning, that the banana story, the same thing, what happens is for everything we are dependent on technology now. Forgetting there is a human technology that is embedded in ourselves, inherent, divine power that is there, that the memory that you have, the Panini, my father used to ask me to recite verses from the last 100th verse to the first verse in the reverse order. So there is a particular way that the traditional Sanskrit has been taught and learned in this country. And that is why now that the changes in the system of learning and teaching have come, the kind of teaching, the kind of methodology that you have employed and you have taught to us this afternoon is very, very useful. They are wonderful. They are useful. The technology helps, the computer helps in understanding the things, because children have too many things now. We never had a telephone. People have cell phones and 100 TV channels and things like that. These are all distractions. In those days, there is only one distraction, that is your education. So I think, I am definitely enamored by the way you presented your presentation. And of course, the computational linguistic learning through technology is very wonderful. Thank you very much for your observations. Shankar Rajaram, you have anything to say, add, say anything, or do we go to any questions if we have?
Nothing, sir. I always believe that Indian traditions have been transdisciplinary, as we have sayings also, like ekam shastram adhiyano navindya shastra nishchayam. So a person who knows just one shastra doesn't know even that properly. So a person should be literate in several shastras, and especially poets. Bhojaraja in his Shringara Prakasha says, Sahityasya sarva parshadatvat. So poets are part of assemblies of all other scholars. So poets naturally know a bit of everything. So
absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much. Vijayalakshmi?
Yes, sir.
Or Aparna?
Yeah, we are both
have
here,
any
sir.
questions? Are there any questions from anybody, or we are winding up?
And I don't see any questions from the audience, sir. We don't want to stand between you and your lunch, so I think.
It's been a really wonderful panel, because each coming from all from Sanskrit, but all from different areas of Sanskrit. So I think as to traditional learning, I think somewhere we have to start understanding that the methods of learning by heart was very important. I don't know, now they have a problem with learning by heart. In fact, I was just talking to
Aparna. I will just conclude with one episode.
Yes, sir.
The kind of learning by heart does not confine your knowledge of your language. See, there is a story about Jagannatha Panditaraya. There is a question here. Namaskar to all panelists. It is more important to know where and how to get the information. most likely online, rather than attempting to memorize anything at all. What does not use, one loses. One must hope this trend can be addressed sooner than later. Thanks to all panelists and Soft Power for those wonderful programs every day. So that is one question. Jagannath Pandit Raya was a 17th century poet who hails from a village called Munganda in Andhra. He's out and out Sanskrit poet. He went to Delhi. He wanted to meet Shah Jahan, was ruler there. He wanted to meet Shah Jahan. So how does he meet Shah Jahan? He doesn't know anybody. He doesn't know any other language. So he was staying in a free boarding house. And one day there is a well in front of the boarding house. Two women, in Urdu, they were fighting with each other. It has become so big that their husbands came, their families came. It has become a huge battle actually. The discussion between the two women has gone up to the king. The king said, is there any eyewitness? The only eyewitness is Jagannath Pandit Raya. He was asked, he was summoned to the court. He doesn't know any language. He said, did you see this? He said, yes. Then this, you will not believe it. He has repeated word by word what this lady said, what that lady said, one after the other, without knowing Urdu. The king was astonished. He said, this man knows in Urdu. He's trying to make some excuse to meet me. He then asked the mullah there to bring the Quran. He asked him to open any page and read 2 pages of Quran. He read both the pages and Jagannath Pandit Raya repeated both the pages. He called Akasantagrahi. That means once you hear, you remember everything. So there is an inherent power. We do a lot of physical exercise. We don't do any mental exercise. We want to keep our body fit. Nobody thinks of keeping our mind fit. The mind fitness comes through Patanjali's Yoga Shastra. Yogaha Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Arresting the mind from other activities will make you concentrate. And then that is yoga, that is through which you can learn, you can by heart. It's not difficult. You see, nowadays the cell phone is so bad that you don't know your number also sometimes. So we are constraining ourselves by not learning, by not trying to refresh our memory and trying to do exercises to keep our memory intact. So with that, I would, if there are no more, there is one more, two more, there are charts. Most intellectually stimulating learning experience, thank you. Will this recording be available? Yes. So thank you very much, Vijay Lakshmi, Aparna.
Thank you.
Soft power, being powerful and also being soft is such a very difficult thing. So soft power makes us do both. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Namaste, sir. Thank you.
You want to just announce the evening sessions, please?
Thank you so much, Dr. Pappu Venugopal Rao, sir, for coming and for putting this session together. Thank you, Professor Gerard Hewitt, for sharing your insights and for your valuable time. Thank you, Dr. Shankar Rajakumar, for your lovely session on Chitra Kavya and for your own original composition. Both of you, Dr. Pappu sir also. Today evening, we have 2 sessions. One is on Mind Body Connect, which is on sports, which will be the latter session starting at 7. It brings together India's soft power diplomacy in the field of sports, which we've probably not addressed enough. Our first session of the evening is on cuisine, and we are very privileged to have Mr. Nicolas Beaumont of France of Michelin Group. He's the special guest, and we also will be Professor Gerard Hewitt can join us for that session if you wish, and we will be talking about Indian food as soft power. So thank you so much.
And we will also have the ambassador of the Indian ambassador to Guyana, Sri KJ Srinivas, as a special guest for the first session in the evening. So,
Namaskaram. Thank you.
Namaskaram. Thank you all.
Thank
and
you.
it was a wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you so much.